gone are the days of VFX arm rod removal, because the real puppetry is back on full show, rods and all. Because with the recent release of the Muppet Show Special earlier this month, fans were left surprised and glad to see the Muppets embrace their puppetry roots again by showing the arm rods. Now, as many of you will know, over the last 2 decades, the Muppets have spent lots of money and time removing the very things that remind us these characters are not real. They are puppets. The more polished the Muppets became with their various shows and movies, the less the fans engaged with their performance. Because the people who watch the Muppets are also a fan of puppets, even when you don't realise it. So when these subtle moves are made to remove arm rods or mechanisms to perform these characters, it loses its appeal as a puppet show, because that's what it is when you break it down. Now, this sparked my interest in diving deep into the history of the Muppets' puppetry manipulation techniques, so now we're going to take a look at the history of arm rods and live hand performances with the Muppets. Now this video will be split into 2 sections, the first one focusing predominantly on arm rods and the various, techniques and slight evolution of how they've done things with these characters over the years, and the second half focusing on the live hand performances, and live hands have sort of changed the least of all of these things. So first of all, let's do a bit of history with the Muppets here. So the rods have always been used. The arm rods are connected to the wrist or to the elbow, depending on what puppet it is, and these things are used to bring life to the character's arms, and they are controlled with the less dominant hand of the performer. Now, back in the old days, the Ed Sullivan days or the Sam and Friend days, there wasn't a lot of puppeteers. There'd be 2, 3, and if they're lucky, maybe 4 of them. And there's lots of photos of Jim, doing his characters and stuff like this. And back in those days, and even the early Muppet Show days, and especially, most famously, with Bert on Sesame Street, they would only have one arm with a rod connected to it, and the other arm would sort of be left to dangle and, well, just have a mind of its own, to be completely honest with you. And this was a sort of not a huge detail that they could do a lot about. They didn't have many puppeteers that they could, train their, monitor skills or anything to, give them the other right arm or do right-handing, as a term became. That wasn't a thing. They were invented how this old, art form was being done. So that left arm or the right arm would quite commonly just flop around, and this is very common in Sesame Street and the Muppet Show from the 70s, and from the even like the 60s with Sam and Friends and all that. It was very common indeed, and this sort of thing, wouldn't even be thought of these days. They don't do this thing at all, because later on, as the Muppets became more polished, and especially as the movies came along, Jim Henson really pushed for the puppetry to sort of hit another level that would be work on the big screen. The puppets were toned down in their movements, made slightly more lifelike, and in that, pinned hands became a thing, no more floppy right arms. They did pinned hands, and the most easiest to notice would be Kermit the Frog. His right arm would sort of be in a right angle position with his hand on his belly, and they would pin Kermit's arm there. Now that's to keep it from dangling around and just being off-putting and not, adding to any of its lifelike characteristics, really. So they would do that a lot, and Jim, when he was on the talk shows and the chat shows, or if Kermit's holding a microphone or a character's holding a prop, to get more of a lifelike or less, conscious thought process when they're performing it, they just have the other arm pinned up. There's literally one less thing a brain has to think about then. So that became the next thing. It was less dangling arms, more we'll pin the arms, and this happened with live hand characters as well, but most predominantly with the rodded characters, and this was sort of the way that things happened for a very long time. It's sort of that was stretched into the 90s, but the thing is, a new generation of performers came in with more of an understanding on the actual puppetry techniques, as they were less being invented but more being studied upon. And with this new generation of people coming in, we've got people who are sort of sitting around not doing much, and maybe they don't need any more background characters. So what are they going to do? This new term called right-handing was built up, and it's a very American thing, and this is what they would do if they had trainee puppeteers, or they were having new guys come in and they weren't big enough to do their own characters yet. They would be made to right hand or be an assistant puppeteer. And instead of having one performer, there would be two. Now this happened from the late days of the Muppet Show straight to exactly right now. They're still used right now, and that's quite a nice little thing there, because what it does is it brings up these new puppeteers with a better understanding on how to do monitors, because they can train themselves with a simple thing as doing a right arm, because that will teach you a lot. And also, it's not as easy as it looks. Right-handing is not as easy as it looks at all, especially if Frank Oz is your non-right-hander performing the main character. Anyway, so that's that three sort of phase of it: the dangling arm, the pinned arm, and then the two performer. Those are your three phases right there. And that is an interesting little evolution. As you can see, time went on, they got more precise, they got more consistent, and they got a lot more nitty-picky with all the little details that they wanted to really just convey that these characters were coming to life. Now, obviously, they got to that point, and, since maybe the mid-80s, assistant performers for Rod characters was almost every character had it, and then that's been consistent from then up till now. But the one thing that did change recently in the last sort of 20 years or so, not 20, sorry, in the last decade, is the arm rod removal. Now, earlier on, well, actually last year, I got the pleasure of meeting Dave Goals, and earlier on in that year, I was at a panel that he was at in the audience, and I met him afterwards. But during that panel, somebody asked him a question about the removal of rods, and he said it didn't really make any difference to him. Those characters are alive in his eyes anyway. It makes no difference if they are there, if the rods are present on screen, or if they are not. Now that's quite an interesting point, and I think it's a very true one as well. And now the new Muppet Show came out, and they didn't remove the rods at all. There was one or two shots of Kermit where they did, but that was for specific reasons, I'm sure. I don't understand me yet, but they did what they did. But that we see them go back to the roots of embracing the fact that Jim's vision was, we're going to have a live puppet show put on a TV screen, because that's essentially what he did. He made the TV screen his stage. So when they took away the rods for the 2011 film and 2014 film and the ABC series in 2015, it was just completely unnecessary and a waste of time and money, because they don't need it. These characters are alive already. That's what Dave said, and I completely agree with that. They don't need it, and the fact that when we saw these rods back, on the screen for the new series, it was like oh my word, that they're still there. And it didn't distract from the performance, but I did have a couple moments where I went, oh dear, there's a rod there, is that a mistake? And that's not the sort of mentality you want to have when you're watching these characters, because they're already alive. So now there's 4 points of evolution. We've got the dangling armed, the pin armed, the two performers, and the erased arm rods. And now we can erase that fourth category, because luckily they're going back to their roots, which is very cool indeed. So that's your brief little history of performing with the arm rods. But now moving on to live hand characters, and examples of those kinds of characters would be Cookie Monster, the Swedish Chef, Fozzie, Uncle Deadly. Those characters are all live hand, and the way these characters work is depending on what character it is and what these characters need to do in a scene, you'll have either one person just doing the head and one person doing both hands, or one person doing a head and a hand, and another person just doing a right hand or a left hand, depending on which hand the performer predominantly uses. And this created a whole new job called right-handing, a little bit like the rod. The rod's, their sort of evolution, and it's quite a similar evolution, but instead, the way that, these characters work, the live hand ones, it became much clearer much earlier on as these puppets were built. This puppet needs two performers, and almost always we see live hand characters with 2 performers. But if you don't, here's a couple things you can look out for. One of them being they may have a wired arm. Now, this might be a wired arm that is deliberately built so it doesn't have any sleeve in it at all for the hand to go in and perform. Or there's the other option, which is similar to the rod one, and that's you pin it. You stuff the arm with stuffing or whatever they use. They might carve a bit of foam in the hand shape, and they'll stuff it in there, and they'll make it the shape that it needs to be to keep it to look natural. Now, this might be done for live appearances, like they did with the arm rods, so it's a bit less to think about when you're doing live TV or something. Or it might just be when there's simply not enough people on set, or it's just not needed. So there's a couple of reasons to do this, and yeah, it's quite cool. Because of the nature of these characters, especially for characters like the Swedish Chef, where there's one person doing both hands because they need to do intricate things with the hands, or it's for comedy effect, but usually it's for picking up props or doing things that would be really hard to just coordinate with one person doing one hand and one doing the other. And because of that, you build up little duos, right? So at the moment with the Swedish Chef, I believe it's Bill Barretta doing the head and Peter Lind's doing the hands, and it used to be Steve doing the hands and Bill doing the head and Jim doing the head and Frank doing the hands, and this builds up little partnerships here, and it's in these instances that performers have done right hands for characters for a very, very long time, like Louise Gold. She did a lot of Fozzie's right hands, and so did Dave Gold, and maybe Dave doesn't do right hands too much now, but Louise has occasionally done it in the last sort of 10 years or something. So it's really cool to see how some of these performers are brought up by doing right hands and stuff like that, and they get 20, 30 years later and they can still be doing it, because these days the attention to detail has become a whole deal more concentrated and attentive, and they know what they want to see, so they're a lot more accurate with all of this sort of stuff. And yes, and as the rods got removed with the VFX, whatever it was they did there, so too did the sleeves for the live hand characters, which is an interesting one, because puppets have evolved, and yeah, I guess they really didn't want to see the sleeves. Now, you have to put your arm into the glove of the live hand. Now, your pinky finger and your weaker finger are together as the pinky finger of the character, because these characters only have 4 fingers. Then your other fingers are just like they would be in a normal glove, and they have to go through a sleeve, right? They don't actually go through the arm of the puppet themselves. So it's an illusion, and usually you don't see it, but they do come into shot quite a bit, and because of that, in the more recent years, they've just been sort of rotoscoping them out, or whatever it is, painting them out, which is a lot of work, and they didn't do any of that in the new Muppet Show, except from one shot with Bunsen in Muppet Labs, which was a bit random because they didn't really need to do that. But yeah, again, so they're going back to their more original roots with the live hand stuff as well, just not trying to paint it out, because they've done that for a very long time now. So yes, I just wanted to point that out. That's very, very cool indeed. With all of that said and settled, it's a good point to sort of dwell on a little bit, because it's so cool that as the new special came out, that they decided to show the sleeves, they decided to show the arm rods. I think there's a really good direction for the Muppets to move into, because it wasn't needed. No one ever went, oh yes, they've got rid of the arm rods. No one ever said that. You might go, oh, it's kind of interesting. I guess it's a new way to look at them. And I'm not afraid of the Muppets doing experimentations and things like that. But for something as raw and as faithful to the original show that they did with the Muppet Show Special, it would just make sense to have them back. And it's not distracting in any way. It's the way, and if it is distracting, it's only because they've damaged themselves by deleting the rods in previous projects. They never needed to do that in the first place. It's a nice little reminder of they are puppets, and it doesn't kill the illusion, because you see Kermit sitting next to Jim Henson, and no illusion gets break. That's why they felt strong enough to be able to do those sorts of appearances, and it's very cool to just see them embracing the reality a little bit there. and not letting everybody else's opinions get to them. They were just doing, yep, it's a puppet show. This is what Jim's original intention was. He wasn't trying to do that, and I don't think he ever would have done that if he had the technology to his disposal. He would have done crazy things with CGI. I'm almost sure of it. He started on it with sort of Labyrinth and stuff, and I'm sure he would have, dove very deep into the world of CGI and virtual production and all that. But I don't necessarily think he would have deleted the rods and hidden the sleeves. I think, there's a little bit of rawness that they need to know there, because he said in a documentary that the reason this show is different is because the real stars of the show are puppets. They are puppets. That's who they are. So anyway, that was my little brief history lesson there. I hope you've all enjoyed. Please do like and subscribe if you have. And yeah, I hope to see you soon on another Muppet-based video.